Hey there, Hazmat here. This video is a bit out of the ordinary from what I usually do, but nevertheless a really interesting one. Fasih reached out after having watched my video on the lore of Hunt Showdown and said he really enjoyed it, which I'm still fangirling a bit over by the way. Seeing that he's one of the original designers of the game, I thought it would be really interesting to hear about his initial thoughts, plans, and expectations for Hunt during his employment at Crytek. The interview lasted just about 2 hours, but I removed several parts and censored a few others as they contained potential spoilers for the eventual outcome of Hunt Showdown. But without further ado, here's the interview.
I am Fasih Sayin. I'm a doctor of narratology, and I'm a game designer. I'm a narrative designer, to be specific. I was working at Crytek for I guess 7 years, and I until I resigned pretty much four years ago, I would say. And during that period at Crytek, I did several things. I was related to multiple projects. And one of them was Hunt Showdown. I was the head of narrative design uh, on Hunt Showdown, and for a long time the only narrative designer, the only writer. Then thank God, uh, that was a team too afterwards. So together we were like at one point four writers working on it. Um, and being the head of narrative design at Hunt Showdown on Hunt Showdown meant me working closely with the creative director Magnus Labrand in basically shaping the world and the story, the backstory of Hunt in several different ways, and that was an interesting experience. Um, but in the end, it was my last project on at Crytek, and I'm really proud of it still, even though I'm no longer related to like related with anything about Hunt Showdown. So at this point, it's its own thing. Uh, the things I know about it are maybe inaccurate now after 4 years of not doing anything, but
Yeah, I can
I think
imagine.
yeah, I think Nicolette Kyle Stewart is right now the head of narrative design there, and she also worked on Hunt from day one. Uh, Excellent writer, and I'm really happy that she's the person who's responsible for Hunt now, and Hunt is in good hands.
How
Um,
how
so,
long did it take you to come up with the setting for Hunt?
that's a complex question, really, because Hunt is it's not a from zero to hero kind of project. Like it didn't completely come out of us. And that's the long story part of it, really. Hunt was originally designed by what we back then called Crytek Austin. Um, and they were originally Vigil Software, the guys who made the Darksiders series. I mean, to summarize it, when THQ went bankrupt, and I'm talking about the actual original THQ, not THQ Nordic, obviously. The THQ Nordic is a perfectly healthy company. It's a completely different companies. But yeah, Vigil was part of THQ, and when that kind of company goes bankrupt, what they do is they sell the assets to make up for all of the debt, and a big part of that are studios and IPs. Um, and people bought studios, but nobody was interested in Vigil, I guess. And that sounds bad, really. It's not like that Vigil was a bad studio. They're actually excellent people. The problem is the business of video games. Vigil had just released Darksiders 2, and that meant if someone invests in them, well, that someone would have to wait at least 2 years for a return of investment for a
Yeah,
new game.
I see what you're getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, so instead of that, you can buy another studio with an ongoing project that would see release in 6 months. So that was sad, and then Crytek acquired them. Um, and originally it was part of their um, free-to-play projects, like project, I want to say, because there was supposed to be a launcher, an ecosystem of triple A free-to-play games at Crytek. That was a plan back then. And a big part of that plan was supplying that ecosystem with high quality games made by Crytek itself. And Hunt was one of those. Essentially, there were multiple games, but I would say there was Warface, there was Arena of Fate, which was never released, and then there was Hunt. Back then, Hunt was a completely different game. Not, I don't want to say completely different. It was still taking place in the 19th century, still taking place in Louisiana.
Yeah, but in terms of gameplay mechanics, it was severely different than what it is
Different,
now.
exactly. I mean, you can find a video online. It was called Hunt Horrors of the Gilded Age back then,
Yes.
and it was a uh, third person shooter, and it was a co-op game. I mean, it was more of a tongue-in-cheek kind of game, less serious. Uh, but it was going to be a series of monster hunts in a weird west kind of setting.
Yeah, it kind of had that,
Uh,
you know, that Left 4 Dead feeling in terms of the
yeah,
dialogue, where they're kind of like chatty and humorous with one
exactly,
another.
exactly. And part of the reason why it was third person was because it was planned to be a free-to-play game at first. So in free-to-play games, you basically want to sell cosmetic items. And third person games are really good for this kind of thing because you can see the items on you. So that feels good. Um, but Vigil also knows how to make third person games. Evidently, I mean, if you look at Darksiders. Um, then, for multiple reasons, the Austin studio had to close down. The project was more or less, I don't want to say canceled, but there was no one to make it, and it was their game. So it was brought to Frankfurt, the home base of Crytek, so to speak, the headquarters, and given over to what was then, well, the Crisis team, essentially, the main team at Crytek, which is where I came in. They didn't have I don't think they were happy with the narrative direction that was coming, and so um, the executive producer of the game, Elijah Freeman, uh, basically assigned me to the project. Um, and the what we had to do there was we were basically told to look at the project as is, and then figure out what we can use and what we can't use of the existing game. And basically, the Frankfurt team said, we will not use anything. Like, we will completely restart the project from the very beginning. So that's why I think of that game as a completely separate game because we basically rebooted everything from like made everything from scratch.
But
So the
several,
hunt,
but several fragments of the lore still linger in Hunt Showdown, like the mention of John Hayward Hunter and the Sinners as well.
so uh, well, the sinners were not there in the first version of it. John Hayward Hunter was more like a um, kind of Easter eggy kind of thing initially, because if you watch the CGI trailer of Hunt Horrors of the Gilded Age, you see a gravestone and it says John Hayward Hunter on it. That was a random name for them. Like we didn't come up with it. And then when I start writing for a game, the first thing I usually do is I sit down and write a short story or something just to find the mood. It's a kind of exploration. And when I was fooling around and writing stuff, I started writing that the first line I wrote was John Hayward Hunter is dead, um, which was, I guess, my way of acknowledging the work the Austin guys did, and in a way saying that project is dead. this is the new project. But I also wanted to somehow include the one character, the one name they had into the lore of the new game. Uh, but it was also an Easter egg. Like if you're careful enough, if you're invested enough into Hunt lore, uh, you can find that name on that gravestone. Other than that, the two games, the lore has, well, they both take place in Louisiana. There are monsters, and there are cowboys shooting at monsters. Other than that, there's no connection really. We redid everything, uh, and what we decided to use, I remember Magnus deciding to use Louisiana still because it's great. It's a great setting for multiple reasons. It's spooky. It's you have the swamps um, and forests, everything. Like it's a moody, great moody setting. Uh, and so I guess the location, more or less, and the general idea of shooting monsters near the end of the 19th century. Um, yeah, those things are the only common things between those two projects. Other than that, it was completely restarted.
Now that you mention Louisiana and the whole theme of cowboys shooting monsters, what did you draw most upon in terms of inspiration?
I really, really like horror that is set in generally 19th century. Um, but basically, most of the inspiration uh, for Hunt Showdown and Hunt Showdown story was drawn from real life events during that era. Uh, so interestingly, it's not connected to any other kind of horror story, at least not in my mind. Um, there was a tendency to move it towards more of a Lovecraftian direction.
Which you can
Um,
definitely feel.
yeah, but we definitely did not want to make it explicitly Lovecraftian with the great old ones and stuff like that. We wanted uh, a unique cosmology and the unique way this world works for multiple reasons. Because we wanted something new, something of our own. Um, the other thing was the visual identity of the setting. Magnus, the creative director, is a very, very visual person. He comes from a concept art background. So Hunt's visual identity was set way before we came up with the setting. He had this um, dark realism idea where everything is real, nothing is comic booky, but everything is a bit darker. And he drew his inspiration from um, glass plate photography of the era, where yeah, everything is a bit smoky. Um, and in my mind, it was like Hunt. I don't know. It almost feels like an X-ray of the real thing with some blood splashed onto it.
I think that's a really good
Uh,
way of describing it. And this setting, and it's just so unique. There's literally nothing. There's nothing like Hunt out there.
the well, delivery was a problem, so I think it came from that. So we were making a first-person co-op game at the time. PvP wasn't in the books yet. So we wanted to tell a story, but we didn't have an idea about, no, not idea. We didn't want to have cutscenes or characters talking to you or giving you quests and that kind of stuff. So how do you tell that kind of story? Um, so I thought of like doing a kind of I don't want to say environmental storytelling because it's not even environmental, like giving the player bits and pieces of information. I guess I was influenced by the Silent Hill games a lot at the time. Uh, I like the way, especially the first two Silent Hill games tell the story. Um, Mainly because if you're not paying attention, you can just play the game as a shooter, as a horror shooter. But you need to really pay attention to connect the dots. And I wanted somehow to give that experience to Hunt players. Um, that's why the inspiration was from real life events, and Magnus also wanted real life myths, real myths, local myths, or real events.
It's funny you bring up Silent Hill because both Silent Hill and Hunt Showdown has that kind of like you brought up that nightmarish feel like you're stuck in a
Yeah.
fever dream almost.
I guess that's why I thought of immediately by looking at Magnus's initial drawings, and the concept art department did a great job. Marcel Shaika, the environment art lead, excellent job. Like I digress, but like it's really interesting to me how people, when people see a beautiful game, they think about the engine as if that's something magical that produces the game out of nothing. But um, there are a lot of really talented people working on these games, and Hunt had really talented visual artists. But looking at those things, that Silent Hill also has this kind of fever dream is the right expression. Really, it's real, but not really real. There's something wrong with it, kind of feel. The other thing is, I wanted to give the player bits and pieces of lore, and I wanted them to connect those bits and pieces into a cohesive whole. So uh, consistency and cohesion was really important, because if you somehow mistype something or make a mistake, you have to retroactively correct everything, and that ruins the fun. And part of the idea was using real places, real dates, and real events. So when people read about something in Hunt or hear about something in Hunt and go to Wikipedia and type it up, uh, yes, something appears there. And you, the idea was the player should go, oh, this is not complete bullshit then. This is just, there was really an event there. And we did that a lot. We used real names, real places,
And
um,
even real characters.
even real characters. Of course, this is our like fictionalization of those characters. The other thing was I was really influenced by epistolary kind of storytelling, like in Dracula, for instance. The storytelling there is, it's not a story somebody tells. It's supposed to be documents, like somebody's diary, um, some kind of book someone's writing, and somebody's researching something. And with that idea came the general narrative framework of Hunt, which is kind of implied in the game. Uh, but basically, is Hunt's story is somebody making research into those monster hunt events or something. Like it's just somebody's researching that, and it's an implied character. We call that character the researcher. And of course, those documents are not reliable. Testimonies not reliable. You can never tell if someone's telling the truth or not, and
Which is
that's
the
fine.
one of the most fascinating parts as an enthusiast about the Hunt lore, that the narrator is always unreliable. Already the treasure hunting in terms of the lore is such a rewarding part where you have to piece it all together and people have their own interpretations, and the the Hunt Showdown lore community is absolutely amazing, and people come up with their own ideas and stories, and it just it makes it so much more rewarding when you have to piece it all together yourself.
Yeah, that makes me really happy. Yeah, there are conflicting things, of course, but that's intentional. And the truth behind everything, um, that was one of the two big tasks I had starting on the project. uh, the major building of the setting in general, like what's really going on here. Um, and the delivery was with documents and conflicting testimonies, etc. So you had to figure out who's telling the truth, which part is the truth, what part do they not talk about, or sometimes they don't remember things. And that idea I really liked because it also explains the cyclical um, P online nature of the game. Because Hunt is self, in my mind, Hunt itself is a document, is a testimony someone is telling. So each Hunt session, like, do you kill the spider a million times? Or was that one monster you kill that was killed once? So in my mind, that was one monster that was killed once. It doesn't get resurrected to be killed multiple times by different hunters. But each hunt session was in my mind somebody telling the story of how they killed the spider.
So the player in itself is an unreliable narrator.
Exactly. So it's a different version of the same story because it's highly probable that none of those versions are real.
I
That
think
is
you just
probably not
blew a
how
lot
it
of
happened.
people's minds here. I think
So
I think a lot of people have been asking those questions.
yeah, I mean, again, uh, that is how I thought about it, how we thought about it, and how we planned it back then. So don't take my word as scripture. Like I had absolutely no contact with Hunt for like 4 years, and it has its own direction now. And we had to. That's not to say it completely changed. It didn't. It follows the same idea. Uh, but yeah, generally that was the idea behind that. That the players themselves are that they are unreliable narrators. The game session you see is not real. It's just somebody telling what happened, and it's probably not true.
I think that's a fascinating angle, and it's an angle I had never even considered. I knew there was us as the players interacting with the environment and reading about the unreliable narrator and the stories, but I had never considered myself to be an unreliable narrator. I think that's a fascinating aspect.
We also like the idea of the players being unreliable narrators because if you read about what like gunslingers did back then, well, I guess that's a common thread in history. Like when somebody's writing about themselves, they always tend to embellish things a
I
little
mean, the
bit.
victor does tell the story, so
Yeah. So and that kind of fit very well into the setting, or at least yeah, and that was the other thing. Like originally we were calling this the Louisiana case. Uh because the idea wasn't to just limit the setting with Louisiana. This was supposed to be the first chapter of many monster hunting stories.
yeah. So we know about New York was also a place that was infected, but I've heard rumors about Nordic hunters as well.
Yeah, so we had at least 10 different hunter groups around the world. I think there was a list somewhere. Um, Hunt was designed to be um, more or less like an Assassin's Creed of Monster Hunter stories. So the idea was right now it's a Wild West game, but our idea was not to limit it to Wild West. Maybe we release an expansion that takes place in Japan. Why not? Or and that takes place 500 years ago or 100 years in the future. Who knows? But we always wanted to use local myths, local monsters, and usually things people do not know about. Uh, so it felt like a good idea after we exhaust kind of the Louisiana thing. What do we do next? We were talking about that. And there is when the idea came, that's how the idea formed. Like, why don't we set it somewhere else completely different and turn it into a series or something? So the American Hunters Association is an important group in the lore, and but they were really important in terms of the Louisiana event. Uh, Elsewhere in the world, other things are happening and always been happening, and there's a reason for that too. But and the American Hunters Association is closely related to the main setting story, so it felt good to start with them. Uh, but then we wanted to go other places, and one of those places was the I had a group of Nordic hunters essentially, and I think that was if we were able to do that, uh, like going into different regions and making different games, the Nordic hunters would be the second thing we would explore, and those guys were supposed to be uh, either descendants of Beowulf or they think of themselves as. Not Beowulf, actually. Beowulf in the poem, Beowulf has a shield bearer called Wiglaf, who's Swedish. So the idea was like uh, Wiglaf actually did all the work in that myth, but Beowulf made himself look like a hero. And then Wiglaf starts a kind of monster hunting group in an organization, but it's more like a clan, and it's been going on for hundreds of years. And at least that was the idea, and that their methods were completely different. There were some sprinkles of their presence in hunt text in the game. I don't know if that text is still there.
I don't
Um,
recall anything about Nordic hunters anywhere. Can you give a clue as to what that might be?
I don't think they were specifically mentioned as hunters, but there was talk about a Swedish ship sinking somewhere. And it's a real event actually. And the idea was there were the American Hunters Association had contacted them and requested help. But that may be taken out of the um, text right now. That may not even be present right now in the lore because maybe that's not part of the lore now. Because frankly, it was a crazy idea. It's a good idea if Hunt was to become a huge IP itself, like with multiple different kinds of games in the same universe or Huntverse. Then we had multiple ideas. Like the Sinners was another such idea, uh, which I took from another, actually a comic book script I wrote long ago. And yeah, there was the Japanese hunters who were and they were fighting entirely different things. Yeah, different methods, different hunters. The idea was turning this into an Assassin's Creed of monster hunting stories based on real life, real world myths. This is not to say that Hunt was once this kind of game and then they cut all of this and it's not as good now. I'm not saying that. Like um, any video game project is like that. You shoot for the skies, you dream big, and then you start cutting stuff.
Absolutely.
And the final product basically looks nothing like the initial idea. I mean, it resembles the initial idea a little bit, and it evolves, it turns into something else. And it is a different thing right now. But I'm still really, really happy about it. I do not regret not doing those things. Um, but it would have been really interesting.
It
You're
would.
right.
You talked about taking inspiration and drawing upon the local traditions, faiths, religion, and so on. In terms of Haitian voodoo, which is deeply tied within Louisiana, are the grunts in your lore being controlled against their will? Because that is the original definition of a voodoo zombie.
Well, there's a short and long answer to this. Short is yes, they are controlled against their will. Um, Long is we had this problem when I started working on Hunt. The concept art department already started building a gallery of monsters, and we had a witch. Yeah, we had a witch
From
as
the trailer.
um, we had a different witch from the trailer. We had a we had a witch, and that was going to be the boss fight, just like in the trailer. And at the time, I guess Magnus was obsessed with insects. Um, and so we had insect-based monsters. I would say technically it's not voodoo, what's happening in Hunt. By the time I left the project, I think the current narrative team was thinking about making it vague. Like, is it a sickness? Is it some kind of monster possessing them? Any one of those things could be an answer. But in my mind, it was a very specific monster that could actually do that. An insect-like monster that would possess um, multiple people at the same time for reasons. Again, I'm saying that was the idea. That was how I wrote it.
Yeah.
But maybe now it's different. They took it maybe to a different direction. So, um, and I don't want to say which monster or what monster, just in case they're still using it and they want to reveal it.
No, of course not.
But it,
I'm not. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna bring. If there's anything you think like I shouldn't have said that, I don't. I don't want that in there. Then just let me know. I'm. I'm not gonna. I'm
I
not
mean,
gonna post it.
technically, it's. I'm not working there. I have absolutely no connections, legal or non-legal. I can say anything, but I just don't want to ruin, the surprise if there's a surprise coming,
Yeah,
or
I completely. I completely get that. I completely get
if
that.
they want to write a story about it, it would be really shitty for me to say, "All right, guys, this is the story." It's just. But that's pretty much it. Like, when they said witch, uh, the first thing I thought about was, well, the closest thing to a witch-like character there is Marie Laveau, who was the voodoo queen, so-called voodoo queen of New Orleans. Um, but the timeline didn't really match with the original Marie Laveau. Uh, and the game was supposed to take place in 1885 or 1880s at first. But then Dennis, who's I think the lead designer of the game now. Uh, Back then he was the principal designer, but effectively he's the guy who designed the whole shooting mechanics and everything. He's the guy who made that game work. Um, and Dennis wanted timeline closer to our time, so we pulled it towards 1895, um, just because of the weapons and technology. There were certain weapons we wanted to use, and we didn't want them to be anachronistic. Um, there are still some prototype weapons in there. They are technically anachronistic a little bit by a few years, but we thought, what the hell? These are hunters. They have connections. Maybe they have access to those prototypes earlier.
I think
Um,
that's an interesting point as well because people get caught up in that in the lower section that this weapon didn't get released until this and that date and so on. I think that's a valid point.
I mean, it's always like, it goes hand in hand, the lore and the gameplay, but I didn't want to step on anyone's toes there. Dennis really knows what he's doing. He loves this kind of game, and it shows. He has, I think by now, thousands of hours of gameplay in Arma 3. So initially, that was the inspiration for Hunt, I think. Like, it was a 19th century Arma, but you're hunting monsters or something like that. But yeah, Marie Laveau, at first I thought of her, but then casting her as a villain kind of character, or casting her as a witch, felt like a lazy uh, decision or lazy idea. So I still wanted to make her part of the story, and I wrote her in as a character. She's a fascinating figure. If for those who are unfamiliar with her life, I highly recommend it. I think like the entire New Orleans history is really interesting. Um, but I didn't want voodoo to be an evil thing in this game.
And that's exactly because there are so many people in the lore community as well. When they are introduced to the Voodoo community with the Bone Doctor and the Weird Sister and Felice, that they're portrayed as evil within the Hunt Showdown lore. But if you look into the sources behind the fear mongering and propaganda against them, you'll find out that they're fighting against the corruption just like everyone else. And I think
Pretty much.
that's fascinating that you bring that up too.
Yeah, it's that's also a lazy thing. It's actually, I believe, one of the first documents I wrote on the project was a short document about voodoo. Because everyone thinks of voodoo as, oh, I have a doll and I have pins and you feel pain. That's evil, dark magic. It's not. It's a syncretic religion, which is as valid as any other religion. It's not evil, not dark or anything. It's not a bunch of, maniacs. It's a legit religion. They have their own churches. And what's fascinating about syncretic religions for me as a storyteller is how they combine elements of different myths into one cohesive whole. And that's why voodoo was so interesting for me. All of these combining with um, Christian saints idea. Um, it fit the story really well, the story we wanted to tell, um, which was, yeah, in some ways really risky. But I think telling it in a vague way like this kind of helps. If you look for it, there are clues to what's going on in there. um, or in time people could figure out what was really going on. Or at least that was the idea initially.
Yeah, we're still
Uh,
hoping for that.
yeah, basically with every single piece of lore revealing a piece of the puzzle, and then also revealing to the world, to the players, that this world is way, way bigger than Louisiana, because of the thing we discussed. Um, and that's why we had hints about, yeah, Viglaf and his people. That's why sinners are in there. They're a completely different group.
And the Asian
Uh,
hunters too.
yeah, yeah. That was always part of it. They have their own methods. And here you go, a tiny bit of hint for you that other people are doing other things. Um, so I think that worked well. Um, because since the early access release of the project, people were interested in the lore a lot, and that made me happy a lot. Um, yeah, yeah, that's
Man, I can't say
basically how
enough
we
good
did it.
things about the lore. I've never, because I played Dark Souls, and Dark Souls is kind of like the same way. If you don't pay attention to the story, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter. But if you want the story, you can go and talk to the characters and read stuff around the environment, and you can figure out the story for yourself. But
yeah,
I get so many people on my channel that are like, man, I really enjoy the shooting in this game, and then I find out about the lore, and it's like a completely new game for me. And that was the exact same feeling I had when I started looking into it. Like it's another layer on another layer.
yeah. That was the idea, and the problem we have to solve in a way, because once we switch to a PvP kind of experience, well, even before that, like it's a shooter, right? Uh, I really don't like uh, the kind of environmental storytelling where you walk around the level and pick up some kind of diary and read it, or some kind of audio recording. I really don't like that, because it feels lazy for me. That's not environmental storytelling. You just put a book in my game, and you want me to stop playing the game a little bit and then read a book. And I feel like if I wanted to read a book, I would go and read a book. It's not environmental storytelling. Um, and of course, like in a tense shooting game, even if it's not PvP, if you stop doing the mission, if one of the players just goes hunting for lore bits, that kind of ruins the fun for everyone. Like like originally it was meant to be like 4-player co-op, and like imagine 3 of you are playing and it's really tense fighting, and the other guys just walks
Standing in a
off
corner looking in a book.
looking at a book or something else, collecting some collectibles or something. So it was a decision we uh, made at the very beginning. No collectibles in the level. The story, whatever it is, it had to exist outside of the level, except, the usual stuff like that is directly gameplay related, like
Yeah,
the monsters themselves, obviously. And then the idea for the story unlocks came. Essentially, um, I felt like if there is no story in the game, where do you put the story, right? And at the time, I think, playing Destiny, and I was fascinated by their lore, um, and really frustrated by the fact that most of the lore is not in the game. Like, it was basically unlocking. You're doing things in the game, and they were unlocking card-like things, on a website somewhere. So if you're playing on PlayStation, you're kind of screwed when it comes to the lore. But you could go online and, take a look at all of the achievements or things you have unlocked, and each and every single achievement was a card, and then turn around and there's a little story in there about that thing. And that was really cool because there was bits and pieces of Destiny's lore that you could piece together. A funny thing is, I found the writing there to be much better than the actual writing in that game. Not saying that Destiny's writing is bad, not that at all, but the writing on those cards was really good. It was what basically got me interested in Destiny's lore. So I wanted to do something similar for Hunt because as you play the game, you do things, you encounter things, and when you encounter things or achieve certain things, reach certain milestones, you unlock a piece of lore about that item. Then I thought, well, it doesn't have to be about that item because, like, how many stories can you tell about a pistol? And then I thought, now, what if it's not about the pistol? The pistol is just there as a prop.
as a device.
Uh, and yeah, basically, it doesn't even need to be central to the plot of that uh, thing. And then from that also came the levels. Like each item having multiple unlocks, and each unlock each achievement giving you another piece of the story. Um, and that went well, I think. It was a long time until like we can realize that. Yeah, at one point I was like, shit, we have more text than an average RPG here.
I think it worked
Um,
exceptionally well. The first time I read the pages on the grunt, I was completely fascinated. I was like, I had no idea there was so much behind this game. And the more you unlock, the deeper you get into the story, and it's it's been such a great journey.
Thank you. I mean, it's again, um, not just me. There's obviously Magnus, who, as a creative director, guided the setting really, and then there's James Rawlings, and of course, Nikki. Uh, they're both amazing writers. And Nikki is actually also the person who sings the songs.
From Port
Who
Software
is
Band.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
exactly. She has her own band, but when I think she decided to write the lyrics of a song for one of the um, one of the stories she was writing for Hunt. Uh, and then I guess the sound department and we thought, okay, it would be a really cool idea if we could turn this into an actual song because the books, like there is this interface of books in the game. I don't know if it's still there. They had Latin names, all of the books, Liber de Monstrorum, things like that. The Book of Monsters, the Book of Equipment, and there was also going to be a Book of Music or something, where we would put public domain songs from the era, from Louisiana. That didn't happen really. But while talking about that, uh, I think it was Nikki's idea to turn it into a song. Then we were like, "Who's gonna sing it?" And she did sing it, and she's a very talented singer.
Oh, it's absolutely incredible. And now it's even it's at that point where you can find pieces of lore within the music now.
Yeah, the person who's writing those songs and singing those songs is actually in charge of Hunt's lore now. So
It's so perfect how it all ties together that way, and there's constantly new clues to pick at everywhere you look with this game.
yeah, yeah. And I was lucky to be working with such a good team, I guess. Everyone was enthusiastic about Hunt's lore. Um, and I'm not the kind of guy who gives specific instructions to people I work with. I basically wanted both James and Nikki to write whatever they wanted within the framework because that always gives you the best result. There are also a few guest writers in there. I think Kai, who is one of the designers, wrote the German text. There was a bit of German text about a knight who comes there to hunt. And Ina wrote something too. Ina Kos, who is the person who draws uh, ability icons, those those tattoo-like things.
Oh yeah, those things are incredible.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and it was just pure luck. Ina is an interesting artist. Her style at the time, actually, her style was not really a good match for Hunt, and we were thinking about what we can do about it because Ina's usual style is um, was at the time comical, uh, and we didn't want that. Uh, but then she also wanted to be a tattoo artist. She likes tattoos. She's into tattoos. And then I think we came up with the idea of an enchanted kind of deck of cards or something, a kind of tarot deck that had different uh, different art, different names for these cards, and people are after this true deck, and that was going to be a hook for another story. And we needed actual drawings for these cards because we wanted to show the cards and make them part of the game. Dennis really liked the idea of using cards as some kind of gameplay mechanic. Yeah, we needed art for that, and we had multiple creepy ideas. That's the point where the writers also come up with visual ideas, such as making upside down illustrations of the cards. Maybe with tarot you have your usual illustrations on the cards, but the meaning changes depending on if they're like upside down or upright. But we initially wanted to have the upright versions of the characters of the cards as upside down illustrations, like a tower in the sky that is upside down and people are falling towards Earth, or the hanged man actually standing. It's like a standing man who's like dancing and things like that, which was going to be really creepy, but it was really difficult to figure out how to do that for all of the cards. Then Ina started drawing, and holy shit, like that woman has a seriously fucked up mind,
Yeah,
which is great.
yeah, it's perfect. I can't tell you how much time I've spent looking at each of the traits. Like
Yeah.
each of them is marvelous. The amount of detail, but not just detail, like the gruesome and gory details that are put into it.
And you would think like the person who's drawing these cards is like some kind of weird maniac you can't even talk to. No, Ina is in person a really nice, cute person. It's just uh, she just has, yeah, a really interesting kind of imagination, and she did a great job on that,
They
on those
fit
cards.
so well with the game. Like the illustrations are perfect match with the game's atmosphere and theme.
They inspired us, actually. By looking at them, we could come up with different stories, and um, yeah, we had different ideas by looking at them. We had concept art, of course, and our concept art team also did an excellent job. We had Magnus's test shots, even photography. We looked at certain photographs for inspiration. But Ina's stuff, the things Ina draws, they are so completely separate from the rest of the game's artwork, that it gives you I think, completely different set of ideas about the setting, and that was great. That was awesome.
You brought up the concept art. If you look at some of the early stuff for Hunt Showdown, you got the really skinny dogs and the water devils,
Yeah.
which were more like serpents, and then the big chunky armored. Are there any other enemy types that we haven't seen, and anything else you would love to have seen implemented?
Yeah, there are things I regret. That's when the game changed from a kind of session-based PvE kind of experience with a boss combat in the end, into what it is right now. We kind of lost some of the monsters we had planned. If I remember correctly, the spider, for instance, was never supposed to be a boss. It was just a regular. I don't want to say regular, but what we call an elite mob.
Like the
Supposed to
armored
be
and
an
the
elite mob.
meatheads and so on.
Kind of, and the armoreds and the meatheads, and they were supposed to be common mobs. The initial idea was, and it still is, making the time to kill really short. It's kind of like Dark Souls and Demon Souls, really. If something hits you, you're almost dead. If you hit them, they're dead. Was our initial idea. Back when the game was supposed to be PvE, we had this idea for a mass of grunts, for instance, that you would walk through, and they're all dead. Essentially, they're bodies. But if you do certain things, they would just get up and attack you. We have traces of that in the game. Like there are grunts on the ground and they get up and attack you, but not that. You never walk through a forest of grunts or something like that. We had a boss combat. At one point, we were planning a boss, and that was the monster I that I didn't mention, and it had ability to possess corpses and people. So we had this idea for a monster made out of bodies, human bodies,
Kind of
and it
like
would
what the spider is.
kind of like what the spider is, but the idea of the monsters in Hunt was always that they possess people, and this thing possesses people and warps them, mutates them, changes them. The spider was like that, but this wasn't like the spider. Like imagine there is a central core to this monster. The outer layer of the monster is covered in bodies, not warped, not changed or anything. It's huge monster, made of humans, not human body parts, entire humans who are dead or possessed. And it was such a grotesque sight. We never could get that done for multiple reasons. And yeah, that looked really, really weird. And we wanted it to look weird and yeah, fucked up in multiple different ways. Yeah, that would have been great. The Water Devil was kind of like a later addition to the game, if I remember correctly, because we realized water slows you down, but there's not enough um, danger in water. And that's the other thing. The game was supposed to be much slower paced in its original form. But yeah, the Water Devil came later. There were multiple other monsters I remember. There was one that was on a tree and it was going to attack you when you're basically when you were passing underneath the tree. We had the mortars, something we called the mortars, some kind of monster that was uh, that had a ranged attack with a splash damage, basically throwing giant, I don't want to say cannonball, but some kind of cannonball-like thing made out of larvae and insects at you, and would damage you and poison you at the same time.
That's interesting
Yeah,
because right now the only ranged enemy in the game, besides the bosses, is the Hive.
yeah. But the hive and the grunt were always there from the very beginning. Um, Actually, the hive was, I guess, visually a proof of concept for the kind of monster we are going for. And the spider was a proof of concept for the kind of bosses we wanted in the game, because we didn't really want bullet sponge bosses. And the spider doesn't really have a lot of hit points. The thing about the spider is it's really fast, erratic. At one point, the spider was able to teleport. Don't ask me. And and there were smaller spiders too, as a mob. Uh, but we gave up on that idea too. But the spider is a really good proof of concept. We worked a lot on its movement, which is very creepy, very spider-like. Uh, in a way, the other guy, um, the butcher, he's kind of like not really like the bosses we wanted at the time. Like he's more of a bullet sponge, or at least he started like that.
Yeah, in the lore he's basically invincible, right?
Yeah, yeah. But that was not the idea. And for those who are wondering why the spider is not roaming around on the map, well, that would never work. The spider is able to move that way in those buildings only. So the nav mesh for the spider doesn't exist outside of those places, and it would have been really a really complicated task to make the spider exist outside of those rooms. But inside that church, for instance, they were the spider really works well. Yeah, there were several monsters. I guess we didn't use several ideas. Some of them were prototyped, like the mortar, and we looked at it and we thought, that doesn't really work that well. So let's not use it.
Might also have
Others,
been cheap to some players to think they got hit by a monster from long range and then got tagged by someone else.
yeah, yeah, it didn't really work well. It wasn't the, I mean, it wasn't the type of gameplay we were going for. And the tree monster is actually based on, uh, I think we actually didn't even produce it. It was on in concept art stage.
But that sounds like a really cool idea because there's basically, besides some elevated positions where people can stand with rifles, there is basically no verticality in Hunt. So
No,
having to take caution of enemies and trees, I think that would
yeah,
have been a great addition.
yeah, that was the idea. But you have to prioritize when you're producing the game.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, and there were other holes in the roster of monsters. Yeah, uh, that's those are the monsters I can remember.
I gotta ask you something because in terms of the lore, Lynch is my absolute favorite. I think she's the coolest part about the lore that she's just on this rampage against the corruption itself. I think she's so fascinating. But what is your favorite part of the lore you've written?
Oh, of the part I have written. Yeah, there are certain things that I can't talk about. um, the I really like the idea of the setting. Uh, we had a really solid and unique idea about all of the monsters. Like that was answering the question, why are there monsters on Earth, really? So what's the deal? Why are they attacking us? So there was a solid idea about that. I think it was, whose idea was it? I don't remember. It was somebody's idea to put the ultimate clue in one of the first newsletters we sent to players who signed up, and just hide it in plain sight and tell them who the actual bad guy in the whole hunt setting is. And we did that, and I was like really happy about that. So and I was looking forward to revealing that actually much later. But yeah, my favorite part is I don't know really. It's I really like the setting as a whole. Uh, the logic of it, how it works, how it connects to past events, uh, and how it's all unreliable. If I have to pick something, uh, like I said, Sinners was based on an earlier idea of mine from another script. And I really like the idea of introducing uh, Middle Eastern um, hunter-like characters uh, into this kind of Wild West setting because that's you don't get that anywhere.
No.
It's a weirdly unique thing. It's interesting for me because I am from Istanbul, and being from this city puts you at I don't know, this is a cliche thing to say, but it's really like a crossroads between the West and the East. You grow up listening to stories from both sides of the both continents, and I think there are a lot of stories on this side of the Bosphorus, and a lot of people don't know about those, don't have any ideas about those. So I really, that was probably my favorite bit, pulling stuff from the myths of this world, so to speak, the Middle Eastern stuff, and putting them in America even. Um, and I was really anxious to see where the story would go. So that was yeah, that was interesting for me, creatively
You
speaking.
certainly have created an incredibly fascinating and engaging lore within your video game. It has been absolutely amazing to follow. There is nothing like it for me, nothing that has engaged me on this level.
Thank you. I mean, we again, I have to say, I make it maybe I make it sound like it was me who made it, but no, like I was at the helm of the narrative department back then. Uh, but yeah, the Nikki and James, excellent writers. Uh, they did an amazing job. They created amazing characters, and that was also fun. We created characters of our own, and then we started playing with each other's characters. Uh, and those meetings were the best. Like we talking to each other, asking us about each other's characters, who they are, what they would do, what they would not do, giving each other ideas uh, about the possible future of Hunt. Yeah, it was a fun project. I really liked working on Hunt, despite the fact that it was a troubled project. Um, and the final product was completely different from what we wanted to make. But I worked with really talented people, and some of them still my friends. I count them with amongst my friends, and yeah.
Would you like to tell people what you're working on currently?
Currently, no, I can't because like currently
That's
there
simple.
are like yeah multiple things actually. Like I worked for a Danish studio called Logic Artists for 3 years, 4 years actually, and still I'm still working technically at Logic Artists. There's another studio called Dynasty that Logic Artists is kind of like a subsidiary of Dynasty Studios, and we worked on a series called Expeditions, which is a historical RPG series. The reason I'm currently not working on something is because we kind of just released the third game in the series, Expeditions Rome, um, which was a lot of fun to write. It's a historical RPG that is set around 50 BC. Uh, and yeah, you go to foreign lands and invade them, and there are stories to tell. It has no magic at all. Uh, everything is uh, everything is as it is in the real world. And the script was something like 300,000 words. So I could have written four novels or something instead of the game. But I'm really glad. I'm really happy about that project. Uh, it was really well received. And yeah, currently I guess we're thinking about like what to do next. It could be the next installation in the Expedition series. It could be something else. Uh, Honestly, we don't know yet. So, but even if I knew, I probably wouldn't be able to say.
No, but what if people want to follow your work? Where can they find you?
I have a Twitter account at Dreamkin is my Twitter handle. You can basically follow me there. Uh, I post semi regularly, uh, but certainly whenever I do something, actually, I post there. That would be the best way of following me. Um, Other than following logic artists or basically expeditions games. I'm currently really active in the forums of Expeditions Rome. I try to answer pretty much all of the questions people have, and yeah, I like interacting with the audience essentially because to me it's video game storytelling especially is a collaboration. I mean, you do it with the audience. It's not it's a story I'm telling, but it's not my story in
Yeah,
a way, if that makes any sense.
it makes perfect sense. And thank you so much for reaching out and wanting to do this interview with me. It's been a blast.
Anytime. I mean, and it's been a pleasure for me too. And yeah, talking about Hunt after all this time, good memories, good memories.
Thank you so much, man.